So when it comes to building a website, one of the areas that can take a lot of time and effort is optimizing the images to get that fine balance between good quality and fast downloading time. Well, today we're going to be taking a look at SVG images, or scalable vector graphics. Now this is a way of being able to create graphics or download graphics, use them on your website, and then you can scale them to any size, whether that's tiny, massive, whatever you want. No loss of quality, no increase in file size. So if you're interested, join me as I take you through the whole process of using these inside Elementor. My name is Paul C and this is WP Tuts, and if you'd like to get more from your WordPress websites, please consider subscribing and smashing that bell icon below to be notified every time new content is added to the channel. Now before we even start working with SVG files, there's a couple of things I want to take you through. The first and the most important is security. Now you wouldn't normally think of security issues when it comes down to dealing with graphics, so you've probably been working with PNG files, GIF files and so on. Well, you don't really have a security issue with those, but SVG files work slightly differently. Now without going into the technical aspect of how they work, it's just worth bearing in mind, if you put these practices into place before you start working with them, you've got peace of mind knowing that you should have no real issues. So the first thing we're going to do is install a plugin, and that plugin does two things. It makes WordPress able to work with SVG files. It'll also allow you to see them inside the media library, which makes working with them considerably easier, which is the first thing. The second thing is it'll sanitize those images. And what do I mean by sanitize? Well, let's just say, for example, you downloaded an SVG file from somewhere you didn't know about. There could be malicious code inside that particular image. But what this plugin will do is it'll get rid of all of that, and it should then allow you to upload and work with SVG files in a knowledge that knowing that everything is nice and clean and ready to work with. So let's take a look at installing that plugin first of all and setting the environment up for working with SVG files. Then we'll move on to start actually working with them. So what we need to do, we're going to come into the plugin section, we're going to search for WP SVG. Let that go through and you're going to find there's a couple of options available. The one we're going to use is Safe SVG. Now this is completely free and it does some basic things like sanitize, allow you to upload to WordPress itself. There is a pro version available which adds some additional features in there, and if you want to check that out you can do and see if there's things in there you need, but I only recommend at this point in time just using the free version. It just opens up what you need it to do. As you can see, there's over 100,000 active installs and it gets a 5 out of 5 star rating, so it's pretty cool. So let's install that. Once that's installed, we then should be good to go. Finally, just activate it, and that will give us the ability to start working with SVG files inside our copy of WordPress. So one of the areas when it comes to working with websites that has the biggest sort of impact is the hero image on your website. With that impact comes size and slowing down your website. Well, with SVG files, we can kind of counteract that. So if you're happy working with a vector format, which is kind of very in keeping with the way things are in 2019, you can use that to your advantage by having small file sizes and also fully scalable, so you end up with a faster loading website, nice hero image that has visual impact without slowing down your website. So we're going to jump over into WordPress, we're going to download an image, we're going to take a look at how we can start using that, how we can set it up and how we can deal with that whole scaling side of things, and I'll show you how good this actually looks. So on first appearance, this may look like any other vector graphic. However, we've got a couple more things going on that first meets the eye. And in this section of the video, I want to show you how you can use this. The reason why I use this particular technique is because it gives you a lot more flexibility. So without further ado, let's take a look at what we're talking about. Now for this header image, I grabbed an image off Envato Elements. There are tons of resources, both paid for and completely free, that you can grab these kinds of illustrations, or if you're comfortable working with something like Illustrator, you could create your own. So I've already gone ahead and downloaded this, and when you download it, it comes in 3 formats. AI, which is Illustrator, it comes in PSD, which is Photoshop, and it comes in EPS, which is a sort of standardized sort of file format. However, it doesn't come in SVG, but don't worry about that. As long as it's a vector format and we can open it up in some kind of vector software, we can convert it to an SVG if needed. So let me just show you what I'm talking about. I've got Illustrator, and as you can see, this is the image that we're working with. Now what I want to do is I want to remove this background because I want to be able to create something of my own. So I can easily come into the layers section. If we come over to window and I come down to layers, I can scroll through and I can find the background, scroll right the way down and see there's our background image. So what I've got now is just the image with no background on there. So all I need to do with whatever software I'm using is come into File, and we're going to come down, for example, into Export As. And inside there we can choose where we want to save this, and we can choose what file format we want to save it in. So we want to make sure SVG is the chosen format, and we're going to say export. It says, do you want to replace this? Well, I've got a copy on my desktop, so that's perfectly fine, so I'll say yes. We'll then get some information about the SVG format. Now with this, there's a couple of things to take note of. You can see we've got styling is internal CSS, but we can also choose from inline style. Now, if you remember back to the beginning of this video, I said that SVG images are not like other graphic images. They're actually built up of various different CSS elements. And this is where you can have that security problem. So with that in effect, we'll leave this as is because everything is going to work perfectly fine. And we could save the graphic if we want to, or we could actually use show code. And inside there, you'll see there's all of the CSS code, all the relevant different bits of code to create this image in a CSS format. So if you wanted to and you had a plugin that would allow you to use this, you could just simply drop in that code in there. We're going to keep it really simple in this video, and we're going to use just the SVG format. I'm going to say OK. We'll then let that save, and we are done with Illustrator or whatever software you want to use. So with that stage done, and like I say, this is purely optional. If you wanted to, you can skip over this section and just jump straight through to working with SVGs. We're now in a position where we can start to work with these. So I've now jumped over into the dashboard of WordPress, and we're ready to create our hero image for our home page. So let's come in and add a new page in. We'll title this Home. And once we've done that, we'll just hit publish to make sure that we've saved those changes. Now for this example, I'm using the hello theme, so there's a couple of things that you'll see on here you may see different to your theme, but don't worry about that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change the default template to Elementor Canvas for this example, so I've got nothing to distract you on the page. Update, and then we'll open up Elementor to start working. So we'll open that up. With Elementor open, we're now ready to start creating our header section, our hero section. We're going to create a simple one row, one column section. And once we're in there, we're going to come up and we're going to set this to have no column gaps. We want no gaps on there whatsoever. So we've now got our basics. So what we can do is there's very different ways we could insert the image. And for this example, we're going to use a background overlay. So I'm going to jump over to the style section. You can see at the moment background overlay isn't available to us. So all we need to do under the background section is just simply hit classic. That will open up so we can choose an image if we wanted to. However, we just want the background overlay for a moment. So we're going to choose background overlay. And from there, we're going to choose normal and we're going to click on classic. Once we've done that, we're going to click to insert the image that we want. There's our SVG image. So I'm going to select that image, insert media, and you can see now that just puts a copy of that in there and repeats it all over the place, and it looks terrible. Don't worry, we can deal with that. First thing we want to do is set the position, and this we're going to set to center center. Attachment we're going to leave as default. Repeat we're going to set to no repeat. And for size, we're going to set that to contain. Now at the moment, again, you'll still see that everything just looks a little bit on the tiny side. Don't worry, that's easy to deal with. We're going to come back over to our layout section, and from there, we're going to say we want the height. Now we could set fit to screen, and that would work perfectly fine to give us a nice full height section, full width section, but it doesn't necessarily work that well on mobiles. The better way of doing it is setting the minimum height, and then we can choose VH for vertical height, and we can scroll that up to 100. And you can see now we've got our image is showing at 100% on screen based upon the actual viewport that we're looking at. So looking pretty good. However, you can see it's a little bit ghosted out. Let's come back over, back into our background overlay, and we'll set our opacity to be 1. So now what we've got is we've got that nice image on there, fully scaled to whatever size we're working with a transparent background. So whatever we want to put beneath it, we could do that. And that's what we're going to do next. So we're going to come back out to our background section, and in there we're going to choose to put a gradient in. So we can choose gradient, and from there we're going to choose our foreground color or top color, which we're going to set to a blue color, and our bottom color, which we're going to set to a paler blue color. So it gives us a nice sort of gradient effect to make it look like the sky. So with that being said, you can see now that we've got that gradient in the background, and it works perfectly with our vector-based SVG image. If we want to put the cloud effect, and this is again where the benefit of this comes in, we can now start using shape dividers. So we can set that to be bottom on there, and we can come down, and for this example we're just going to use those particular clouds, and you can see there's our clouds. If we want to edit those, adjust the height and so on, we can do that. We can flip them if we want to, all the normal things you'd expect to be able to do with this particular effect. So you can see now that we've got this SVG image with a colored background, all the kinds of good things we wanted to do, all customized. And the beauty of this comes in where we change the resolution on here. So at the moment we're looking at what you'd expect to see on a desktop. However, come back into tablet, everything scales perfectly, no loss of quality whatsoever. come down to mobile, and again, same thing again. Everything scales perfectly with no loss of quality. So we're gaining the benefit of those SVG images being scalable without losing any quality, with no increase in file size, all done inside Elementor Pro and Elementor. So pretty cool, I think you'll agree. So now that we've seen how to use SVG images for our hero section of our website, and we've taken advantage of those small file sizes, scalability, and so on, how about we take a look at doing some special effects using the same kind of things. We're going to take some SVG images and we're going to use those to create some more interesting border effects using Elementor. So let's take a look at how we do that right now. The next thing we're going to take a look at is how we can create these customized borders using SVG images. Now you could probably create some of these just by using the gradient in the background, but it still kind of limits what you can do. You can get as creative as you want by using SVG images. And while this is just using a gradient, you could use anything as complicated as you wanted to in the background. So let's take a look at how we use this one. So you can see we've got a mouse over effect, so it hovers off. We've got a drop shadow on there. And if we scroll down, we've got another kind of effect, which is using a different technique, which also animates in. So we've got some flexibility there on how we can do it. So I'm going to show you the two methods. The first one, this one we can see at the top, this is the slightly more complex method because it requires us to hand code some CSS, but it's also very flexible. So let's just jump back over to the dashboard and see how we can do this. Now I've gone ahead, jumped back over to the dashboard and opened up the page, duplicated the left-hand column into the right-hand side, and we're now ready to take a look. So before I go any further, I just want to go over how things are set up. What we currently have is a single row column. We've added some padding at the top and bottom, and then we have a nested inner section with two columns inside there, and that's what we're working on. So this is important, we have that section inside, that inner section. With that in place, we're now ready to go on and start setting the styling to configure this right hand column. The first thing I want to do is just give us a little bit more breathing space around our content. So we're going to come up and select the column. Once we've done that, we're going to come over to the advanced section for the edit column. We're coming to the padding area and we're going to set that to be 50 pixels. That gives us a nice bit of breathing space all the way around. And now we're ready to start customizing the CSS for this effect. So all we need to do is come over to the left hand column again and come down to the CSS, or the custom CSS section at the bottom. In here we can start writing out our own custom code. So the first thing we're going to do is target this specific element. Now inside Elementor we can do that very easily just by using selector. So when you work with Elementor, make sure you select the particular element that you want, then you can use selector for CSS. We'll open out our curly brackets and we'll move to the next line, and that'll close those out automatically for us. So we've now targeted this particular right hand column section, and that's what we want to work with. So the first thing we're going to do is choose the border style. Now the nice thing when we're working with Elementor is you can see once we start typing things inside the CSS area, the editor will automatically start showing you a list of what it thinks you're going to type in. So we can choose border style for this example, and we're going to set the border style to be solid. Now we have to use solid in this example because we can't use dotted or dashed or anything because the effect won't work. So just bear in mind, if you try those, you're not going to get the effect that you want. So there's the first thing, and you can see if we look at the right hand side now, we've started to get a border around our outside of our particular column. So there's the beginning. Next thing we're going to do is come down and we're going to do border width. So you can see again, we can easily come down and we can just go through until we get exactly what we want, or we can just continue typing and it'll filter out to get anything that sort of matches what we're typing. So there's border width. Now you can set this to any value you want, larger, smaller. We're going to go with 15 pixels to start off with. And you'll notice that every time I do that, I always end every single line inside the CSS editor with a semicolon. Next up, we're going to choose the border color. So we're going to come down, we're going to choose border color. And now we're going to set some values in here. We don't want this to be a color, we want it to be transparent, but we have to make sure that we put a certain level of transparency to make sure that Safari, being a browser that has a bit of a technical issue with this at the end, so we have to have some level of transparency for this to work correctly. So what we're going to do is we're going to use RGBA, going to open up our bracket, and we're going to put 0, 0, 0, 0, and then we're going to put 0.01, and then we're going to finish that off with a close bracket and our semicolon. Now don't worry that we're getting this little error. It's expecting one thing and getting something else. It still works perfectly fine. Next up, we're going to put in the actual URL to the image that we want to use, our SVG image. That's very easy to do. We can come down, we can do border-image, and then we can put in the URL. So we'll just type in URL, open up our brackets, put 2 2 sets of double speech marks, and you can see it automatically puts the close bracket at the end, and as always we need to put in the semicolon. Now we're going to come back, we're going to find the URL to the image we want to work with in a moment, but the final thing we need to do is just to come down and do border. I'm going to do slice, border image slice, sorry, my mistake, and we're going to put 15 in there, and we're going to close that out with a semicolon. So we need to know the URL to get access to drop that in there to create our background. That's very easy to do. We can either go into our dashboard and go back into our media library and copy that, but I've already done that, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste that in there so we can see exactly what happens. And we'll just paste that in. And you see, once I drop that in there, we now get our border effect underneath with our SVG image. Now, if you're ever unsure, how do you find the link to that particular image? It's very easy. If we come back over and take a look at our media library, and we'll select that image from our library, you can see we've got the copy link, which is the entire link to the path of this particular file on our server. So you can simply highlight that, copy it, and then you can use that inside the CSS editor like I've done. But that's how easy it is to use the first technique. Yes, it involves a little bit of code, and this will be on the website, so if you want to grab this for yourself so you can just simply drop in the link to your particular SVG file, you can do that. There'll be a link in the description below. But obviously if you want to type this in yourself, you can simply pause the video and copy exactly what I've done. Nothing complicated about it. It's very, very easy to work with, but hopefully it'll demonstrate exactly how you can use this effect. So now we're going to take a look at how we can do the different second effect, which includes some animation. Now this is a little bit different, and this just utilizes Elementor on its own. So let's take a look at that effect right now. The second method is set up a little differently. We've got a row with 2 columns, and inside each of those columns we're going to have an intersection. So you can see on this left hand side we've got an intersection which we can select with this little blue handle at the top, and the same with the overall section. So what we need to do to start working on this right hand column is come over and choose an intersection, drop that in there, then just make sure that we've only got 1 column. So we're going to select, we're going to delete that column. So come in, choose the column and say delete. So we now have got an intersection which is just 1 row, 1 column. So there's the first part. Next thing we need to do now is start to set up the background border and put some content in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over and I'm just going to duplicate these so we've got exactly the same information in both that we can work with. So we need to duplicate each section. So finally, let's just duplicate the button and move that over to our right hand section. Okay, so there's the basics in place. We now need to go through and configure a few bits and pieces. First thing we're going to do is just add a little bit of breathing space around this particular inner section. So we're going to select the inner section itself, come to the advanced section, and we're going to come down to the padding area, and in there we're just going to drop in a value of 30 pixels just to give us a bit of breathing space. So there's the first thing. Okay, so now we're ready to go through and put the background image in there. So what we need to do is come over and select the right hand column, not the inner section that we currently have selected, but the right hand column. So I'll select that. You can see we can come over to the advanced tab now on the left hand side, and we can set any values we want for margin and padding and so on in there. So for this, we're going to set a value of 20 pixels for the padding itself. Next, we can come up to the style section, and now we can go through and choose our background. So make sure you've got background type set to classic. What we're going to do then is we're going to come down, we're going to click on the image, and we're going to choose this gradient. We'll select that, insert our media, and you can see that drops in the background. A couple of problems we have. First of all, where the text is and our buttons and so on, it's transparent. We'll sort that out in a moment. We've also got the background being repeated and not sized correctly. And again, we can deal with that very easily. So from the left-hand section, we're going to come down to set position to be top left. We're going to come down to repeat and set that to no repeat. And finally, we're going to set the size to be cover. You can see that now sorts that out and gives us a nice section in there. So what we need to do now to come over and actually set this background for this intersection white is to choose the intersection itself. So we'll select that, come back over to style, come over to the background section, come into classic, and set the background color to be white. You can see that now gives us the effect that we wanted. So we'll update our page, and we come over to our sample page and we scroll down. You can see there's everything in place, sized correctly and everything. The only thing we're missing is the animation effect, and that's easy to rectify. Come back over to our dashboard, select our inner section. Once you've got that selected, we can come back over to the left hand side, come into advanced and down to motion effects. And in there you can see we've got entrance animation. We click on there, we're going to come down and we're going to choose zoom in. You can see that'll give us the animation effect, and we're going to change that to be fast so it animates quite quickly. Hit update, and if we come back over to our sample page, and let that reload. Scroll down, you can see there's our animation effect with our background in place the way we wanted it to be. So a super cool and easy way of doing it if you don't want to get in and hand code it through CSS, but it does take a little bit more effort to do this particular style. So now we've seen how to create these effects on borders and so on, and how we can use SVG images for our hero. What about things like the logo for the website? Can we use it for that? Well, up until this point, we've pretty much relied upon working with two logos. One is your normal resolution for typical screen display. The second is a higher resolution version for Retina display. Now, this is quite a good way of working, but it does mean you upload two images. However, if we start to use SVG images, we can benefit from that scalability and no loss of quality, no matter what resolution, screen size, or density of resolution we're working with. So let's take a look at how we can utilize that now to create and use our logos. There are a couple of things we need to take into consideration while we're working with those, and I'll go through that in this stage. As you can see, I've got a demonstration in front of me. We've got a nice logo on the left hand side that's fully scalable, all created through SVG. So let's take a look at some of the things we need to take into account. This time I'm going to jump over into Affinity Designer as opposed to Illustrator, just to demonstrate the fact that you're not restricted to just one program. So the logo we're using demonstrates a couple of things. First of all, we've got some text in there, we've got some normal shapes, everything is still vector. So when we want to go to export this, we just simply come to File and we choose Export. This is where something important needs to be taken into consideration. If you're using fonts that are not going to be installed on the system, then you have to make sure you convert those to curves. In other words, you break them apart and they're no longer a font that has any kind of link to the system they're being viewed upon. So just bear that in mind when you're creating any kind of artwork that includes fonts. You can break them apart, create them to curves, but what happens then is, depending upon the complexity of the font that you're using, can drastically increase the file size. So if we take a look at this example, the font is still intact. And you can see at the bottom it says estimated file size just over 2 kilobytes, incredibly small. Now, because we're using a very specific font that most people are not going to have on this system, we can't rely upon that. However, we can, if we want to, break these apart. So in other words, we can say export the text as curves as opposed to being dependent upon the font. If we do that, you can see the file size now jumps up to 400 plus K. So a massive increase in file size, and makes that pretty much useless using an SVG. We could obviously go back and change the font out to put something different in there, and just for this example I'll do exactly that so you can see the difference and how this changes things. So this font is quite complex. Let's just come in and just change that font a second. And while this looks absolutely terrible, it should be a good indication of what we're talking about. So let's come back up to File and Export again. Make sure SVG is chosen. You can see the file size with the fonts intact, pretty much the same. However, if we choose to export the text fonts as curves, you can see that now only increases it to 20K. So 10 times the size of the original one, but still getting close to being a decent file size that could be something that can be scaled across the board. So just bear that in mind if you're using anything that has text in it. There are going to be implications if you're using specific fonts. However, like I say, for this example, I just want to show you how you can use it for working with logos. Anyway, so let's just go back to putting that as it was. We'll export this out. We'll just leave it as is, and we'll click on Export, and then we'll just name this whatever we want to do. So we'll hit save. I'll say yes to that. So there's our logo already created for us. We can now switch over and start working inside Elementor. So I've already gone ahead and set up a basic header section. Navigation on the right hand side, and what we're going to do now is we're going to use the site logo on the left hand side, drop that in there, and I've set my site logo up through the hello theme, so it's just being used. Obviously, whatever theme you're using, you can do the same kind of thing, or you can just drop an image in there, however you want to work with it. It's all pretty much the same kind of thing. So you can see it now drops in, and as before, we get a tiny little version of our logo on there. So what we're going to do is click on that. We'll come over and we can just specify a few things. Image size we want to be full because we want the fullest, highest resolution. Style, we're going to come over there and we can do things like we can set the width. Now we can work with percentages, pixels, or VW measurements, and we can also do the same for the width and the max width in percentage. We could also set these up for different sizes based upon the device that's being viewed upon. But because we are using vector graphics in SVG format, we know we're going to get perfect quality across the board, and we don't need to have multiple different versions of the same logo. So now that's in place, let's just set up some of the sizing and we get everything all sorted out. So we're going to set the width on this, and we're going to set a percentage value. Obviously you can use whatever value works for you, so we'll set that to about 70%. If we want to, we can jump over then and take a look at any of the responsive modes, the tablet for example, and we can take a look at the mobile and make any adjustments. But what you can see is that the look and the feel of the entire logo is perfect no matter what scale it's set to. So with that in place, we are pretty much good to go. We've got the logo set up. We can go and control everything we want about it, knowing that the quality is going to be perfect. But as I said earlier in this section, just bear in mind that SVG is not necessarily going to be the perfect option for every situation, especially if you have fonts that are quite complex in there. So if you can't work with SVG images on your website, you still need to work with JPEGs, PNG files and so on, but you want to get smaller file sizes, take a look at the video in the corner right now. That's going to get you up to speed with using a couple of different ways of optimizing your images. That's going to be a great way of moving forward. If you want to use them instead of SVG or alongside SVG, you can get small file sizes and everybody's happy. Well, that's how we work with SVG images inside WordPress and Elementor. Do you use SVG images yourself? If you do, let me know in the comment section below if you found a better way of working, or if this has opened your eyes to different ways you can utilize them both in your design and also alongside page builders like Elementor Pro. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you didn't give it a thumbs down, that's perfectly fine. Just let me know in the comment section below what you did or didn't like about the video. Helps me create better content for you. As always, all the applicable links are in the description below, and my name's Paul C. This has been WP Tuts, and until next time, take care.